DC just recently announced that we're getting a Superman reboot in 2025, so let's take a look at the franchise and rank them. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a good one today. I'm the movie ranker, and today I'm going to be ranking all the Superman movies from worst to best. This is a franchise I'm not very familiar with. I didn't grow up with any of the Superman movies. I've only watched Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman before doing this ranking, so I don't have no nostalgia or nothing like that, so maybe my ranking's not going to be the same as yours, but I love to hear yours down in the comment section. Drop your rankings, your favorite, your least favorite, and we'll have a great discussion. And let's get into this ranking. Oh, and a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to be adding in the Supergirl movie or the Justice League film since that's more of a team effort. But whenever the new Superman movie comes out in 2025, I will probably put all those in my new rankings, so stay tuned for that and let's get it. So easily coming in the last place at number 7, we got Superman 4 Quest for Peace. Wow, the only positives I can give for this movie is that Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman showed up, because everything else is hot garbage. We get an evil Daily Planet in this one. They're trying to sell tragedies and propaganda. They basically become like any other news outlet out there. We get Superman who decides to stop every nuclear missile that's fired. Like, all because of a little kid wants him to. It just seems so ridiculous to me. Like, he would be busy nonstop if that was the case. But my big negative with this one is obviously Nuclear Man. He looks like he's straight out of 80s wrestling. Like, you know, the way he's dressed, he like roars like a lion. He has no motives aside from wanting to kill Superman. Like, it's just ridiculous, man. It's so cheesy and corny, especially the whole moon fight where they're like beating him into the moon itself, and it's ridiculous. There's scenes where they're in space and their cape's still flowing in the wind. Okay, I can let that one slide, okay? But there's a scene where a girl ends up getting taken to space and she can still breathe and scream and everything. It's like, there is just no logic to be found. It's incredibly cheesy and the effects are worse than ever. It just feels like the writers didn't care at all about this one. Up next, at number 6, we got Superman 3. The one with Richard Pryor. And it's all over the place. It feels like there's 3 movies in one here. It feels like a Richard Pryor 80s comedy. It feels 1/3 Superman movie where he goes to Smallville, and 1/3 like James Bond flick. Our villains feel very James Bond like, how they're like rich and they got this technology and whatnot and they want to take over the world. And the way the story plays out, it feels very episodic. Like, this could be split into like 4 episodes for a series more than a film. Like, every half hour or so, it feels like, okay, that section of the movie closed off. Now let's start a new one. The tone is all over the place. It goes from serious to completely goofy, 1 second to the next. Superman splits in 2 at one point and he fights himself. There's like a good and evil version of him. And you get this ridiculous junkyard fight. And it's just craziness. And the whole splitting in 2 really reminded me of Army of Darkness, where Ash splits in 2 and there's the good Ash and the evil Ash. I'm like, that's how ridiculous this seems. And the resolution and how that gets solved is completely stupid as well. I also find the lack of Lois Lane highly disturbing as well. She was like one of her main characters in the first 2 films, and in this one, she's maybe in it for 5 minutes. She goes on vacation at the start, she comes back at the end. It's just, why would you do that to one of the best characters in here? She feels completely wasted. But as bad as this film is, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't entertained by it. There's some dumb fun to be had here. I especially like the whole ending scene where the big robot turns the female villain into a robot. That was pretty gnarly seeing that, but yeah, you got to turn off your brain to have fun with this one. Up next at number 5, we got Superman Returns. Now, I feel like this is the black sheep of the franchise. It's one I've heard literally nothing about. Like, I've heard how bad Superman 4 was before, and I heard how great the original ones were, but this one just never gets talked about in the movie community. And this one really feels like a throwback to the original. It's much more lighthearted. It got Lex Luthor back into real estate schemes and that again. And I actually really like Kevin Spacey playing Lex Luthor. He actually fits the role perfectly. He's a bit more cynical than Gene Hackman, but it just works. I think Brandon Routh makes a pretty good Superman, but he's a mediocre Clark Kent just because he's not given anything to do as the character. And it's really hard to compare Kate Bosworth's character to the original Lois Lane. This is a much different version of the character since she's been abandoned for 5 years, and started a new family and everything. So, she doesn't exactly see Superman the same nowadays. I did find the whole twist concerning her child and Superman. I thought that was pretty clever. It added something more to the story. And the film has some decent action, but the effects aren't that great. The CGI is not where it is today. Everything looks all really cartoonish. But I imagine in 2006 it was up to standards at the time. But nowadays, looking back when he's flying and stuff, you're like, it doesn't look that great. And the story here is a bit overstretched. It's 2.5 hours long, and there's just not enough there to tell that much story. They kind of drag things out a bit, so it kind of affects the pacing for me. But overall, this is a decent entry in the franchise. It could be viewed as a standalone, or you could look at this as a sequel to the Richard Donner film. Up next, at number 4, we got Batman vs. Superman. Now, this is the Ultimate Edition. That's what I'm going by. I have never seen the theatrical edition. I've only ever watched this on Blu-ray, and I have the Ultimate Edition, so why would I go and check out the lesser version? You know what I mean? So I'm going by the Ultimate Edition, I should say. And yeah, I kind of dig this movie. I like it a little bit more on every watch. I like the fact that it takes place right after Man of Steel. We get to see the consequences of what happened in that film, all the destruction in that Superman caused, and you see how it affected everybody in Metropolis and Gotham City. And no one really trusts Superman anymore for not being accountable for all the damage he's done and the lives that were lost during the fight in Man of Steel. This leads to interesting questions in that we don't really dive into this type of thing in superhero movies too often, so I like that we got this discussion in here and what's right and what's wrong. Of course, this leads to Batman not trusting him as well, and it kind of starts our encounter between the two. Batman's played by Ben Affleck in this one. I think he does a great job. We get a darker version of the character. He's more cynical. He's like branding the bad guys and stuff, and which is causing them to get killed in prison. So Superman and Batman are both doing good and bad in here. You can see both sides of the story, and it's a pretty good setup to get them to fight. The big problem I have with this film, though, is the million side plots. There's just way too much going on. It feels convoluted, and this causes the story not to have a nice flow to it. We're always jumping from one thing to the other, which leaves you confused on your first few times watching this. We deal with the aftermath of Man of Steel. We get the introduction of Batman and their big fight together. We get Wonder Woman in here for the first time. We get introduction of Lex Luthor. We get freaking Justice League set up. We get Doomsday fight at the end. We get so much going on in this short period of movie. I wish they would have just did Batman vs. Superman and then worked on the Justice League in the next film. There's just too much going on here. And also, Jesse Eisenberg is terribly miscast as Lex Luthor, or his son, Junior, whatever the hell it is. I understand he's a different character from the older films, but it's not so much how the character's written, it's the delivery of the lines and such. I just find Jesse's delivery is so cringeworthy, and it's just like so cheesy, while the rest of the film is so grounded and serious that it just doesn't mix well. But there is a lot of good here with its action, its emotional scenes. I love the introduction of Wonder Woman. She is so badass. Her theme song is really cool. There's a lot of good here. I just feel like the movie is held back by its ambition. Up next, at number 3, we got the original Superman from 1978. Now, this movie is incredibly influential to the superhero genre. It was really the first big superhero movie to take itself seriously. Christopher Reeve immediately wins you over as Superman and Clark Kent. He's so believable as both, and just the way he acts so goofy as Clark Kent in that you wouldn't imagine him as Superman, you probably wouldn't think about it twice. While other characters that play him, I feel like you can kind of tell it's still the same guy. So Christopher Reeve easily is my favorite character to be Superman and Clark Kent. And also Margot Kidder is my favorite Lois Lane of all time. I love how she's spunky and full of personality, and it's really nice to see the romance between her and Superman throughout the entire film. That really is the selling point. And of course, Gene Hackman makes an excellent Lex Luthor. Probably my favorite version of the character as well. He's very old school with his real estate plans, breaking off the West Coast so he could have the waterfront. Makes for an interesting villain. The movie is outdated, yet it's modern at times. It's very hard to explain. Like, I bet in 1978 it looks phenomenal. Like him flying and everything, it still looks pretty good to this day. There is other entries that look worse than this original film. And you also got scenes like where he's rescuing Lois Lane from the helicopter. The action there looks fantastic. And of course, John Williams' score is just so iconic, so good. As soon as I heard it, I knew it was John Williams without even looking. I was like, you can tell that he was just coming off Star Wars. It was around the same time, and it has a little bit of that flavor in there. And, he's the master at making these musical scores. I will say the first act does move a bit slow for me. The first 45 minutes or so, up until Clark becomes Superman. Then I find the movie picks up right to the end. Little bit of pacing issues in the intro, but aside from that, a pretty stellar entry. It's an exciting, lighthearted adventure that changed the superhero genre forever. Up next, at number 2, we got Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's first entry into the DCEU. And it's an interesting one. It takes kind of the story of part 1 and part 2 and puts them together to make this reboot. It's much darker, much more grounded than the original films. I personally think it's the best written out of all these movies, story-wise. General Zod's intentions and motives are clear. Pacing is great from start to finish. Henry Cavill makes a great Superman. Not my favorite. I still prefer Christopher Reeve. But it's unfortunate that we get no Clark Kent in here basically at all. A few scenes where he's just kind of this unknown guy, fisherman or whatever. I suppose he's Clark when he's with his mother and father, but he doesn't work at the Daily Planet or nothing like that. And since we don't really get that Clark character, we don't get the relationship between him and Lois Lane, or at least not the way I would have hoped. But I have to say the action is phenomenal in this film. All the Kryptonians battling it out in the city and seeing the mass destruction is just awesome. This definitely takes the more Dark Knight approach to things, where things are darker in tone and everything's more serious and grounded, which I appreciate. That's probably more my style. I'm not the biggest fan of the colors and the lighting on screen though. Like, at times everything's way too dark blue, and there's other scenes that are lighter, but it's way too glossy. So I don't know who dealt with the editing with the color in that, but things feel off and it kind of annoys me a little bit. But regardless of that, it's still a great film and one of the better entries in the franchise. But coming in the first place, we got Superman 2. And I've only seen the theatrical cut. I heard the Donner cut is even better. So this is definitely my number one at this point. First time watch, like I said, with most of these films, and I just had a blast. I find there's a lot of entertainment value here. We get our trio of villains, our main one being General Zod. I love those three. You got him, the girl, and like the muscle that doesn't speak, and it's just funny seeing them come to Earth. It's like a fish out of water story, and how they don't understand how Earth works. Like, they think it's Planet Houston at first. And just them working on their powers, like the guy trying to make the lasers come out of his eyes, is hilarious to me. And Superman happens to give up his powers to be human and to be with Lois Lane in this flick at the worst time possible, when these three Kryptonians come to Earth, and he's the only one that can stop them. I will admit that they resolved that scenario way too easily. It feels like there was some lazy writing going on there. I heard that they fixed that in the Donner cut, but that is one of my only negatives I have for this film. I also like that Clark is living like a double life in this, and he's trying to hide it from Lois, and she ends up figuring it out, and they have to kind of work out the relationship together. Going through this film, at first I was like, Lois Lane is so much more unlikable in this one compared to part one. But you understand after a while what she's going through, and by the end, she admits that she was selfish and everything, and she really redeems herself. I love that they added in the new powers, like the laser eyes. We get this big, corny battle in the city, which I absolutely loved. And yeah, I like the little bit of humor thrown into here as well. So it may not be a popular opinion, but Superman 2 is my favorite of the franchise and is a complete blast to watch. I had so much fun with it, so it comes into number 1 for me. So there you have it, guys. There's my ranking of all 7 Superman movies. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, these were mostly all first time watches for me. So I'll watch them all over again when the new one comes out in 2025, and we'll see if my ranking changes by then. You can also follow me on Letterboxd and Instagram. Links to those are in the description of this video. Make sure to drop your favorites, your least favorite Superman movies down in the comments section. I'll be sure to have a good discussion with you. And until next time, thanks for watching.